Hey there, this is Josh from Career Services at Tyndale's Center for Academic Excellence, and welcome to the Craft Your Resume video series. In this video, I'm going to talk about CVs and all the various components a CV has. Now, if you're not sure whether you need to craft a CV or not, I strongly recommend you check out my Build the Right Resume video. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. But this video can help you to approach your CV if you're not 100% sure what you're doing or whether you need to do a resume instead. Either way, that video still has some useful resources linked at the end that will be useful for building a CV. Anyways, if you've never built a CV before, or if you've never heard of a CV, essentially it is short for Curriculum Vitae, which is Latin for life path or life race, and is basically a detailed document of your professional accomplishments. Unlike a resume, which is only 1 or 2 pages long, a CV is 2 to 3 pages long. You can technically go longer than this, but I would argue that the absolute maximum should be no more than 4 pages. Either way, I think 3 pages is the ideal length to go with. Usually you will submit a CV for employment in academia, the medical or scientific fields, corporate business sectors, or overseas employment. For any other line of work, you're usually wanting to submit a resume. Now, many people use the word resume and CV synonymously, so sometimes it doesn't hurt to double check what the interviewer means by CV. But if you're applying to work outside of those fields of work that I mentioned before, you're often probably safe to assume they're looking for a resume. With that out of the way, let's discuss how a CV is built and the sections you can include. Now, a CV is a lot like a chronological resume. It's just a longer one with a few more sections. Sometimes it can also be like a combination resume too, if you wish. So, like those resumes, the CV also starts with a personal info or contact info section. If you happen to want a heading for that, you can call it a contact or contact info section if you want, but you don't necessarily need to add a heading. This section can look a number of different ways depending on the template that you're using, but usually it's going to have the same info as what you'd have on a resume. Your name, your mailing address, your phone number, and a professional email. You can also include any professional contact info, such as for your professional website or professional social media accounts. However, don't add your personal website or personal social media. Focus entirely on your professional content here. In terms of mailing address, it is becoming increasingly more common that people do not include this info, so if you're not comfortable including it, feel free not to. But you could always list your city and province without a specific address if you wish. Yet if your address is far from where the employer is, you could consider withholding that information altogether, although you could always simply put next to your address in parentheses or brackets, open to relocation beside your address, or indicate your willingness to relocate in your summary statement in your cover letter. Ultimately, you're trying to be a little bit strategic here and to consider what might be appealing or a turnoff, being close or far from the workplace, because some business positions, this is a significant factor to consider. So consider what you're willing to share here and what's wise for you. Finally, you could consider putting a professional photo in this section if you really want to. There is some debate as to whether that's a good idea, because there's a ton of different ways you can format a resume here. And the only thing I'll really say is ultimately you just want to consider the impression you're sending. If you're not sure how others might perceive your resume, it never hurts to get a second opinion. That is one thing that will always be helpful. Talk to your friends, your colleagues, your family members, any sort of peer. Get an opinion on what you've done thus far and see what they have to say and what impression they get from it. Now, this next section provides a brief summary of your expertise. For the heading, I usually go with professional summary, professional highlights, or professional profile, or some such thing. You don't even need to include the word professional if you don't want to. The point is, this is just a summary of some form of your entire CV, to be honest. And it's usually a very brief paragraph. 3 to 4 sentences, no more than 5, absolutely no more. And in this, your first sentence will probably include your name, the position you're applying for, your number of years of experience in the job field that you're currently working in that's relevant to the job you're applying for, as well as a pattern or two of professional skills and accomplishments that are relevant to what you're doing. You could also include a sentence about your professional goals and what you'd like to contribute to the company or the organization you're applying to. Again, you're keeping this very briefly, so you'll want to practice your writing skills for writing concisely. Don't ever make this more than 5 sentences long. Personally, I also recommend people consider the number of lines of text that are here on the CV. For example, I usually say around 5 to 6 lines of text, and if your document's formatting has a pretty wide section for this, that works out well. If you have a very narrow section, what you might find is, yes, you want to keep that line count the same, but you're going to have less sentences because you don't want it to be too obtrusive or take up too much space or you don't want it to be an eyesore, basically. So consider the aesthetics here too. I like when people use this section, this summary section. I think is very helpful when you don't have a lot of relevant experience. Hopefully when you're doing a CV, you do. But if not, this is an opportunity to streamline everything, to tie everything together into one brief argument for why you're a good candidate for this job. A nice trick for this too, when you're talking about your years of experience. Sometimes it's hard to say, I have 5 years of experience doing this line of work. It's hard, it's not always possible to do that. But what you can do is you can look at all your experiences and see what patterns have been present in your life for the past 5 years. Because then you could say something like, I have 5 years of experience supporting the underprivileged, assisting with life management skills, and helping them meet their needs. And that a statement like that can apply to a lot of different areas of work. So you're generalizing and streamlining everything together into a neat sentence. Next up is your employment history or experience or work history section of your CV. Simply list your past employment, all your experiences in entries that are then ordered reverse chronologically. In other words, the first entry at the top is your most recent experience. The entry at the bottom of the section is your oldest experience. Then if you have space underneath each entry, you're more than welcome to have a couple bullet points that describe the activities and responsibilities you engaged in. I typically advise people to have bullet points that are, well, no more than 2 lines of text. When you're doing this, each entry probably only has a few bullet points, somewhere between 1 and 4. You don't go overboard here. The reason why I argue for the 2 lines of text is because it really helps people to streamline things into focused statements rather than have like 8 small statements when there's probably a pattern among those 8 and you can group them together into a neat, well, sentence, really, a single sentence. And in there, you can also include specific accomplishments or anything you've been recognized with, but please do not mention anything about your salary, how much money you earned, any wage increases you received. Basically, talking about money as a whole gives a very poor impression. Avoid that at all costs. Don't be afraid to list research opportunities, lab work, or field work you've completed. This is a good opportunity to include that. You can give them their own entries. Ultimately, this section is really about, well, providing a full record of all your professional accomplishments. Now, if you ever have an employment entry that you had multiple positions in or different titles in, that can cause a bit of a headache when it comes to organizing it, but here's how you can do that. Basically, organize the entries according to the position or like the title or company that you worked at, the organization, and then subdivide that particular entry according to your positions. So in other cases, you might organize your entire history according to your job positions. You don't want to do that. You want to organize it by the name of the employment organizations that you worked for. Then for each position, you can put the dates on there if you want. You can put where if that's relevant. You can have your bullet points for each subdivision of that particular organization you worked for. Now, you might ask, Josh, what do I do with all those experiences that just aren't related to the job I'm applying for? Well, I mean, depending on your situation, even unrelated experience can be worth noting. Because it can show that you have managed to maintain consistent work, to be part of a team, to have potential and skills. There are going to be transferable skills that you learned in whatever those experiences are that you can probably apply elsewhere. What I would recommend is that you try to provide fewer details as a whole for these positions if you can try. Try to keep them very general if they're not very relevant. But ultimately, you're really trying to focus on the relevant experiences that you have. But if you can't, this is where the summary section that I mentioned earlier can be very helpful. As I said, that's your opportunity to package everything together. Because if you plan it well enough, it can help you to tie those irrelevant experiences. You take the irrelevant experiences and then you show why they're relevant, why the employer should care about that. And that's why the summary section is quite helpful. So even if the employer might not see any relevance into it, if you're creative enough, you may be able to appeal to them and help change their mind on it. Now, volunteer experience. People often ask about this, but yeah, even that has relevance here in the CV. Ideally, though, your relevant volunteer experience is found entirely within the work experience section. But you can dedicate volunteering to its own section if you'd like, especially if it's not strongly relevant to the field that you're applying for. Maybe separate that from the work experience. Otherwise, if you do want a dedicated section, feel free to do so. Either way, you can organize this section chronologically, just like the work history section. Education. Now, education is good to follow up with here after your work history. Sometimes you can put it before your work history too. It just kind of depends on, well, how accomplished and prestigious each of those areas of education you've received. But either way, here you're going to list your degrees, the types of degrees, the majors, the dates they were conferred to you, or whether they're still ongoing. The only exception is the high school diploma. These are generally cut out, at least in Ontario, unless you have no other education. But basically, once people get post-secondary education, you use that instead of, use the bachelor's instead of like a high school diploma. The format's going to look something like this, and usually you're going to list your degrees and certificates either by the name of the degree or the name of the institution you received it from. And then you're going to organize them in reverse chronological order with your oldest or your newest degree at the top and your oldest at the bottom. Under each entry, you can also have some bullet points where you can include the minor or concentration or focus, or if you did honors or had any special recognition, you can put the GPA there as well as if you wish. You don't have to. In my opinion, don't list your GPA unless it's flattering. But problem is, what is flattering? That's really a matter of opinion. I guess I would say a rule of thumb might be if your GPA is in the B range, then go ahead. For degrees that you're still working on, simply add a date range instead of a date of conferral. On that date range, have the date that you began the degree on one side. On the other side of the range, have just say present. So that way the employer can see that, well, you started here and it's still ongoing up until now. And then as a final note, if you really want, you can have some bullet points beneath your degrees if you wish. Summarize some of your course content on there. You keep it very brief though, and you're probably going to do some translation, for lack of a better word. Academic language, they have their own lingo. You're appealing to an employer. They may have been out of school for a while, and they certainly don't care about the course codes. When you look at your courses that have just very long, complicated names, see if you can condense that down to a couple words. See if you can condense several courses that are relevant to one another. See if you can condense those into a couple words. My best piece of advice is take a look at your syllabus if you still have them. Syllabi generally have a course description at the top, followed by learning objectives. That will give you some insight on how you can summarize some coursework. Alright, it's time to talk about your professional skills. This one's easy. Just list skills you've developed throughout your professional career and that are relevant to the job. These can include things like your social skills and negotiation and empathy and listening, organization skills and time management, scheduling, creating systems to organize things by, and of course, technology skills in Microsoft Word, Microsoft Office as a whole with Outlook and Excel, or even website design or Google Suites or Zoom. That's now more relevant than ever before. And then there's tons of practical skills you can include too, but they tend to be more, basic. Like you're physically resilient, you're able to work long hours on your feet. You're in healthy condition, you take care of yourself, you work out. You can lift heavy objects. Depending on the field of work, this is relevant. And then there's technical skills, which are a lot like the practical skills, but more nuanced. They require, precision, probably training, likely exercise and practice. Things like, something as simple as woodwork to computer design. It's hands-on, but it takes some finesse to these types of skills. And we certainly can't forget your character strengths. List those too. Anything on like your punctuality, your conscientiousness, how you're a natural learner, or how you're looking for self-improvement all the time. Those things that just really reflect your personality and your personal values. Obviously, though, at the end of the day, you're going to need to assess and adapt this entire section according to the job you're applying for. So my advice, take a look at the job advertisement, see what they're looking for. Look at their website. What's their cultural values at that workplace? What does the employer seem to appreciate? That's going to give you some insight to how you should be designing this here. Ultimately, when it comes to designing this section, my best advice for it is to focus your efforts into patterns. Look for patterns of strengths and skills. Look at your past experiences and see how you can condense it down. Because the last thing you want to do is just have a ton of bullet points. I see that every now and then. Someone will have a bullet point of like 12 bullet points and each of them have like 2 words on them. That's just it's not appealing. Instead, when you look at those 12 bullet points, you're going to see that some of them can be grouped together. Some of them can be compacted together because they're thematically related. So look for those. See what you can turn into a sentence or 2. But as usual, I often say, keep it to 2 lines of text. They are focused, brief, and intentionally designed points. It really looks good on you because it shows that you're thinking about this. You're thinking about what appeals to them, how you present yourself. This isn't just a sloppy resume that you've thrown together. There's intention here. The other thing is to avoid making statements that can apply to literally everyone, such as I'm resilient or I'm creative. Everyone can say those things on some level. Everyone has some form of resilience. Everyone is creative in some way at some point in time, right? So instead, look for opportunities to show, don't tell here. And you can do that by making statements such as, works well under pressure, such as during large corporate events serving hundreds of customers. And see, what I'm doing there is, I'm not personally pulling upon past memories, but that's what you want to do. You want to look at your past experiences, past memories that you have, accomplishments that you have, and see how you can pull that into now and use examples, generalized examples, but examples nonetheless, to add substance to what you're saying. Those other statements, like I'm resilient or I'm creative, they're fluff. They blow away with the slightest breeze. Whereas this is heftier. There's more weight to it. It's more substantial. It means more, and it's more impressive. So it just sounds good too. Now, there are a few other sections you can include on your CV, but these do tend to be optional. You'll want to select these according to the job you're applying for and what you know about the employer. The first section would be certificates and training. You can include that if you want. This is where you put things like first aid, food handling, smart serve, or maybe any professional training you've gotten in your professional field of work by like a regulated body or some such thing. Now, it's important to note that a lot of training and certificates do have an expiry date. So if any of your training has an expiry date, actually include it. But if it has expired, then don't include that certificate or training that you've received. Memberships. If you have any special memberships with an association, a college, or a fellowship, feel free to create a dedicated section for that. List their name, the date that you joined them, and if you want, and if you have space, do a bullet point and include any special roles that you've performed in them. Then you can also include a publication section if you wish. If you've ever authored anything, you can include those by listing the title of your publication, the name of your publisher, the date it was published, the usual. You can even briefly summarize your work in a single bullet point that's 1 or 2 sentences long if you want. Hobbies and extracurricular activities are another section you can do, but you want to make sure it's somehow relevant, and it can be hard to do that, and it can be hard to be effective at doing that, but it is possible. For example, I've heard stories of CEOs who've been hired and their resume listed their experiences as leaders and coordinators of online groups of players for their World of Warcraft video game. Or for their EVE Online business corporation, where they had substantial influence over the marketplace's economy. So it's really all about your creativity here and your ability to sell this hobby as a relevant talking point. Either way, you're probably going to organize this section much like your strengths and skills section. Just focus on creating a few thematic points, bullet points that have patterns of your experiences. Just a sentence or two, keep them interesting, keep them short, and so on. Last, but certainly not least, or it might be least, depending on your opinion, we come to the reference section. Once upon a time, at least in North America, references used to be often included at the end of a CV or even a resume. But it does seem to be going out of fashion because they're often provided after you have your first interview. We almost always expect you to have your references handy for your first interview or afterwards. As a result, it's a little bit redundant to list it sometimes on your references. However, it can still be worth considering, especially if the employer asks you to do it, which they sometimes do. So pay attention to job descriptions and job ads. Sometimes they'll actually request you to put your references on your CV. At other times, you might want to consider adding a reference section if you already have a series of at least 3 professional references who are prepared to speak on your behalf, especially if you already have received recognition or awards from them or from working alongside them or working in their same workplace. If you've co-authored or conducted research with them, that's even better. Basically, if you have references who are quite familiar with you and your accomplishments, it can really help to put them here. Usually when you list them though, you're going to have their name, their position, the organization they were a part of, how long you've known them, maybe when you've known them. You're going to want to also include their phone number, their email address, and a brief description of your relationship with them. So those are all the sections of a CV, but let's summarize. First up is your contact info, followed by your summary or your profile, then your work experience, and if you want, your volunteer experience, education, and professional skills. Following that, you can also list any training and certifications if you want, any memberships, publications, extracurricular activities, and finally, your references. But all these latter ones are optional based on what it is you're trying to do. Now, before I go, I'll leave you with a few resources for finding your own CV template or building your own through a CV generator. While most of these resources have free options, some do have premium, so you might want to be aware of which ones you're breaking into. But basically, you can go to Microsoft Office's template webpage. As a student, you can log into Microsoft Office with your mytyndale.ca email address, and that will give you access to their premium templates. Other websites include livecareer.com, resumebuilder.org, and myperfectresume.com. All of these have articles, templates, and builders that you can use. Anyways, that's everything you need to know about what goes into a CV. This has been Josh from Career Services, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.